Hello everyone and welcome to Clarity 16.0.2 Supportability and Feature Training. I am Vib Mehrotra, and in this module we will be talking about the customer enhancements that are coming as part of 16.0.2. As part of this release, we have quite a few of customer enhancements that we will be covering, so this will be a long section that we will be going over. Specifically, the items that are going to be addressed in the specific release that are related to customer enhancements are enabling of the document attribute in risk, issues, and changes within modern UX, alerting for CSV export when the export is greater than 500 records, again in the modern UX, increasing the max width of the logo size in modern UX, increasing the task PR external ID size. Status report will now support field level security. Additional parameters that can be passed to channels and links. Enhancement of the investment allocation job to accept additional parameters. Change to the custom subobject license type. Board and swim lanes to support dynamic lookups. Blueprint grid is GA. Ability to define tooltips for attributes in the modern UX and language translation. Import attribute grouping within column and filter. Channel to support SSO authentication and business rules for custom subobjects. In addition to these, there are other customer requested enhancements that have been added to the product that we will not be covering in this module, as these specific ones will be covered in their respective topics. So the ones that have been added is the timeline in projects, custom investment types, ideas, and share physical period view options. Roadmap timeline to support dynamic lookups for swim lanes. The roadmap timeline ability to hide swim lanes. The grid view option for displaying decimal based on studio attribute setting, and allowing the edit for task duration field within the modern UX. The reason this is important is because our customers engage directly with the product management team via multiple channels, such as the weekly product management office hours. That weekly office hours drives majority of our quick win items. We also have the monthly roadmap reviews and the monthly design studio reviews, where we discuss directly with our customers on the different functionalities that they have raised and would want us to address to increase the adoption of Clarity within their organizations. Based on these direct feedback from our customers, we make specific changes into the product to address their needs. All of these enhancements are direct results of customer engagements. So the first change that's coming is that the document attribute within the risk, issues, and changes have been enabled in the modern UX. This attribute will work similar to the other attachment attribute, and existing documents that might have been populated in the classic UI will be displayed here. Similarly, any attribute added in the modern UX will be displayed in the classic UI because it's the same attribute behind the scene. Historically, the exporting of data in modern UX, where exporting to CSV and the number of rows that were going to be exported, if those were more than 500, then we would use the background job to perform the export, and then based on the end user's notification settings, we would either notify the user or not notify them that the export is complete. This used to cause a problem that in the modern UX, if an end user had that setting disabled, then they would not get the bell icon notification after their export to CS was complete for any export that had more than 500 rows. Starting 16.0.2, we have removed the dependency to the reports and job notification settings in the classic UI. Now, we will alert the user after their export to CSV has completed in the modern UX, regardless of their settings in the classic UI for jobs notification. We have doubled the size of the logo the in terms of pixels in the modern UX. Now, the modern UX will support 480 pixels in compared to 240 pixels that used to be in the past. This change is only for the width and not for the height. The changes are made for the header and login logos. We have also increased the size of the image tooltip from 30 characters to 80 characters. The tooltip is when you hover over the image, the message that gets displayed, that is a tooltip that in the past used to be only 30 characters. Now it is 80. This change was actually made in patch 1 for 16.0.1, so some customers might already see this change. Customers that are integrating Clarity with external applications such as PeopleSoft or SAP are trying to create tasks in Clarity. However, the length of the task does not match the length of these external applications, and that is because the external applications are using the globally unique identifier length, which is of 36 characters. To address that need, we have now increased the length that the task object ID, which is the PR external ID, from 16 characters to 36 character. This should not have an impact to any of the existing data, but the new integrations or pulling in the data based on integrations will support now 36 characters. Status report has been enhanced to now work with field level security. Securing of the attributes will have field level security icon displayed next to it, and we will support this in the canvas, grid, and in the preview for status report. The following attributes in status report cannot be secured: attachment, ID, name, overall status, report date, and report status. When defining channels or links in modern UX, many times the customer will try to define those channels to a portlet or a portlet page in classic UI. And in order to have the data for these portlet page trimmed down to the specific user, they would try to pass the user's either user ID or resource ID. However, we never allowed that as a parameter, so the end users would have to hard code those numbers. Moving forward, starting 16.0.2, we will now support 2 additional parameters that you can be passed to channels or links. These 2 parameters are the user's internal user ID 5 million number and the user's internal resource ID 5 million number. The syntax for those 2 are on your screen, where you can pass the user ID using user internal ID with a capital I, and the resource ID would be resource internal ID with the capital I's. Customers that have large amount of investment allocation data to be processed had reported to us that they are encountering where the job would take large amount of time to complete because it is trying to run against all the investments. This was because the investment allocation job did not accept any parameter, so it would always process for all the data in the system. Based on the customer request, we have now added 4 parameters to this job. This would be the same standard parameters that are in other jobs that are available in Clarity. The parameters are investment, where you can pass an individual investment name, OBS unit filter mode, or the investment manager. The job is updated to perform updating of the TSV data also. In addition to the existing fields updated by this job, we will also update 2 new fields, which would be the allocation and hard allocation for labor resources. Because of these changes, where the job will now update TSV data and the allocation and hard allocation, we've changed the name of the job to update investment allocation and usage. The job description has also been updated to reflect the same. Job should be executed anytime labor allocation and usage needs to be rolled up to the investment. The screen right now is displaying the additional fields that have been added to be updated by this job. So in 16.0.1, we would only update the list of fields that are defined right here. However, as you can see, starting 16.0.2, we've added the TSV data, and we've added the allocation and hard allocation TSV data. Starting 16.0.2, we are also making a change as to how the license type is calculated for sub-objects. In the past, if a user used to have create, delete, or edit right to the sub-object, then those would be counted as full license type. However, starting 16.0.2, we are changing that, where the create, delete, edit, and zog access right will now be tracked as restricted license type. The view access right for these will continue to be tracked as view only. Clarity will now support custom defined and system restricted dynamic lookups similar to static lookup as columns for your board view throughout Clarity. So anywhere where you have the option to see the data as board view, if that specific object has dynamic lookups for an attribute, you can have your board views column configured to show using those dynamic lookups. The same dynamic lookup can also be used in the roadmap timeline as swim lanes. The details for the roadmap will be covered in the roadmap training. We have now moved towards making the blueprint grid as GA. In the last release, we introduced the blueprint grid as beta, and any administrator going into the modern UX administration would see two tiles, one for blueprints and the other one blueprints beta. Now you would only see a single tile called blueprints. Clicking on that blueprint will take the user to the blueprint grid, where they can manage their blueprints in a grid format. We have also introduced a new flag called has draft. This checkbox will automatically be populated if a specific blueprint is edited by the admin but not published yet. So any unpublished blueprints would then have this value populated, where the administrator can then go inside and finish publishing of the blueprint when they are done. Some reminder for this blueprint functionality, since this was introduced in the last release. Some of the things that I wanted to remind everybody about is all common grid functionality is available in this blueprint grid except for the plus icon to create a new blueprint. That will still work as it did in the past, where you have to select a specific blueprint and make a copy of it. Context sensitive menu will allow the user to make a blueprint default. Ability to select a blueprint and available actions will allow the user to copy or make a blueprint default. New blueprint grid will not display associated templates using and last used. This means if there was any template associated to the blueprint, you would not see them listed here, or assign a template to a blueprint. That would be done within the template itself. Blueprint grid will allow the admins to edit the blueprint name and make a blueprint default if they have the appropriate access right. Blueprint name can be edited either in the grid or in the flyout, and the ability to multi-select blueprint and perform a bulk delete action is also possible. Based on customer request, we are now introducing the ability to define tooltips in the modern UX. There is a new field now available in the attribute section of the modern UX administration, which is called tooltip. This attribute will allow the administrator to populate tooltip against any attribute that is available against the object. Any attribute that has the tooltip configured will have a new icon, which is the tooltip icon, displayed next to it. This icon will be displayed in the grid, flyout, and properties page. We also support translating this label into multiple languages. So the tooltip can be translated into multiple languages, and the format to doing so is exactly the same as how labels would be translated into multiple languages. Starting 16.0.2, we are also standardizing how the column and filter attributes are going to be grouped. In the previous releases, in certain parts of the application, you would see that the attributes within an object would be listed under the object name, and in other parts of the application, you would see that all the attributes were listed just all together. As you can see in this example, that when I go into hierarchy color by, I would see all attributes across different objects to be listed together as one. This made it a bit confusing to identify if an attribute had the same name in multiple objects, and it was a little difficult to identify them. Starting 16.0.2, now you would see all the attributes listed under their object type. So this way you can easily identify the attributes as to which attribute is from which object. This change is being done for the view option, color, tile, and fields. The attribute layout changes is specifically being made in the following areas: hierarchy metric card fields, hierarchy color by field, widget aggregation attribute, widget configuration group by pull down, roadmap item metrics under view options. Enhance the generic filter to add the total group to support TSV total filtering for all of the above areas. Customers that were using channels to access either Clarity or external application via Clarity pages were reporting back to us that if the external application required SSO authentication, then the channels would not work. They would not be able to see the external application because the SSO flow failed. And that was because in the previous releases, we only supported basic authentication for the external application. So if the external application allowed the end user to log in using basic auth, then you would be able to see the login page, enter your credentials, and log in. But if the external application required SSO, then we would not be able to support that. Starting 16.0.2, we have enhanced the channel functionality to now support SSO authentication. In order to support that, we are adding additional parameters to the channel configuration. All the administrators will see these two parameters in every blueprint every channel that has been defined out there. The two parameters work as follows. The first parameter, the check session endpoint URL. This is the URL that will be used by Clarity to validate that the Clarity user is authenticated against the third-party application. This URL will have to be obtained from the third-party application itself. So the administrators will have to determine that URL from the third-party app, use that application, configure it in the blueprint channel. And the way Clarity will use is that if this data is, or this field is populated, then Clarity will first use this URL to get a 200 response code. If the URL returns the 200 response code, then the application will, or Clarity will proceed in displaying the third-party application. However, if the URL returns something other than 200, then the Clarity will invoke the next URL, which is the single sign-on URL. The single sign-on URL will be used to basically navigate the user to the IDP where the user can get authenticated. This URL can either be the IDP relay state or it could be the third-party application with the SP configured authentication. This is the URL that will be used, and the data or the page to authenticate the user will be shown as a pop-up on the screen so that the user can populate their SSO credentials, and once done so, the pop-up will be closed and the third-party application will then be displayed within the same channel frame inside of Clarity. The two new URL is as here on the screen, that when going into the channel setup, the administrators will see the two new URLs, the single sign-on URL and the check session endpoint URL. If no value is configured for either one of the two parameters, then Clarity will continue to function as it does today, and the channels will be displayed as it does today, where it only will support basic authentication. If a value is found in the check session endpoint URL, then the SSO flow will be invoked. For an end user, the flow will be as follows. In this example, I am using Rally as the application, which is the third-party application that is configured within my Clarity. The end user will click on the channel module inside of their investment. Clicking on that channel module that is configured with SSO, the end user will get a message in Clarity displaying the name of the module that they just clicked on. So in this case, I clicked on Rally Iteration Status, so I will see the name of that specific module, followed by authentication is in progress. A pop-up will open up which will ask the user to continue with their IDP based authentication. The user will complete their authentication, and once done so, the pop-up will automatically close and the third-party application, which in my case is the Rally application, is then automatically displayed within the same channel that I clicked on. Based on customer request, we are now adding business rules for custom sub-objects. Business rules will be supported across multiple applications, multiple investment types. Business rules have a new target object attribute that will be listed in the blueprint parent object along with the custom sub-object. So for example, if I want to define a business rule for a sub-object inside of ideas, then I will go to ideas blueprint, go into the rules of that blueprint, and when defining the rule, I will see this new target object field. Clicking on this field in my example, I will see the parent, which is idea, as well as any of its sub-objects. In my example, the idea object has two sub-objects, status report and strategy alliance. All three of these are listed. I can select one of them, and based on which one I select, the actions that can be performed against it will be available to me. We will support this for ideas, projects, and custom investment type, as well as custom object. If you are selecting the sub-object in this target object field, then only two actions will be possible against it, either the disabling of editing of specific attributes or disabling of the entire record. Business rules on sub-object can be enabled for the following objects: projects, idea, custom investment types, and custom master objects. Once the rule is created with target object selected, then the administrator cannot change that. So the target object field is an enter once field, and if you do not want to use that field and do not want to use that rule against that object, then you will have to delete that specific rule and recreate it based on the new target object. Status report canvas will also support this business rules. All right, so we talked about a lot of those functionalities. With that, let's see the product in action. So here I am in Clarity 16.0.2, and I'm going to be covering several of these functionalities that we just covered in the PowerPoint. So I will be going between the modern UX and classic UI administration throughout this demo. To begin the demo, the first place I'm going to go is to show you that in the risk issues and changes, the document object, the document attribute has been enabled with the API. So in this case, I'm going to go start. In the classic UI administration studio, I'm under the objects. I'm just going to look for the risk object for this purpose, and under attributes, if I go into the document attribute, I can now see that the API attribute ID has been populated. I can see the same for issues and changes, but we can take that this has been populated, the same attribute value has been populated for the other two. So let's look at how this will work in the modern UX. So for that, I'm going to go into my modern UX. I'm going to go into my projects, and in here I'm going to go into a specific project where I can look at the risk issues and changes. So I'm going to go into compliance, audit, security, and in here I will look at the risks that have already been created for this specific project. And under the grids, you can see that the document attribute is already available, and I can see any documents that have been previously uploaded are automatically listed here. This attribute works just like any other attachment attribute, where I can click on to attach new files or upload new files by just clicking on the upload file, selecting it, and the file gets uploaded. If the attribute is configured for multiple attachments, then I can continue to attach, or I can just delete that specific one. The same thing is available under issues, where I have the document attribute available for me. All right, the next I want to go and show how the export to CSV with more than 500 records is functioning. So for that, I'm going to first go in and show you my notification configuration. I'm using channels to go into the notification configuration in Classic. So you can do the same by going into the Classic UI and then going into your settings for your notifications. To show this demo, I'm going to disable all my notifications. And essentially, actually, all I had to do was just really disable the reports and job. But just for the demo purpose, I'm going to disable all my notifications. Saving that information. So now I should not get any notification for that's been configured. But because we have changed our export to CSV to no longer depend on reports and job, I should continue to be able to see that after the 500 rows record has been exported to CSV, I'll still get that information in the bell icon in the modern UX. So let's see that in action. I'm going to go into tasks, and here you would see that I have over 500 tasks listed out. So I have about 1088 tasks that I can, if I want to, export it out as needed. So I'm going to click on export to CSV. I get this message where the export is in progress, and once the export is done, this message will go away and I will get in the bell icon that the export is available for me to download the data. I can see that the download is complete. If I now go into the bell icon, the CSV export is now available to me. So Even though all my notifications were turned off, I am still getting the CSV export for a data more than 500. Right? Next, I'm going to go into the Modern UX administration side, and I'm going to go into the system settings where I can see the new length or width that is possible for the logo that I can upload. As you can see that the message has been displayed to let you know that we will support up to 480 pixel. And to see that, I'm going to go ahead and upload a new logo, which is a new Clarity logo up to 480 pixel size. Logo is uploaded and you can see that it is now extended. So if I had even a longer message, even that would display. In addition, the tooltip has been expanded to support up to 80 characters. To see that in example, I am going to copy and paste my value to show that this environment is used for showing the new functionality coming in 16.0.2, and hovering over, now I can see up to 80 characters worth of message being displayed within my logo. The same thing is possible in the login logo also, and I can easily see that. Next, I'm going to go into my administration blueprint, and you can see right here on the screen that the only option that is available to me for the blueprint is the single tile that says blueprints, and clicking inside of it I can see the grid layout for my blueprints only. The new attribute that has been added is I've already included in my grid layout, which is the has draft. And to see how that works, I can go inside any one of my blueprints. I can edit my blueprint, and when this blueprint becomes in an edit mode, I could make changes or I can just go ahead and exit out. That means the blueprint itself is still in edit mode. Coming back into my blueprint grid, you can see that the has draft now is populated for this specific blueprint. This is telling me that this specific blueprint was in edit mode and I have not finished either publishing it or discarding my changes. I can see this checkbox go away by going back into my blueprint. I can this time now publish it, go back out, and when I look at my pages, I see that the has draft is being removed. Some of the other functionality, this was covered in the previous release when this was released as beta, which is in my blueprint grid. The things that I can perform is I can edit the name within the grid itself, the name of my blueprint. I can do the same by going into the flyout for my blueprint by selecting it, and then I can change the name of my blueprint from the flyout. The other fields can be configured but cannot be modified. I also have context sensitive menu, so by right mouse clicking on it, I can make this blueprint as my default. Selecting a single blueprint will give me the option to either delete it or mark it as default, and selecting multiple of these will give me the option to delete multiple of these blueprints that I would want to. Alright, I'm not going to delete any of these and move on to the next part of the demo, is where I am going to show you that the task ID, the PR external ID, has been extended. To show you that, I'm going to go back to my studio in the classic UI. I'm going to go into objects and go under task object, and within the task object I'm going to go find my task ID, which is the PR external ID. When I open that up, I can now see that the maximum size allowed for this is 36 characters. So now the PR external ID, or the ID of the task, will support up to 36 characters. Let's return out of here, and we are going to go back to the modern UX, and we are going to go back to the administration again. And next we are going to see that we support status report will support field level security. To do that, I'm going to go back to the attributes of the modern UX administration. I'm going to change the filter where the object is now going to be status report. So as you can see, status report is an object that is available that I can secure. I can click on that, and specifically I would want to secure my scope status. So I want to secure the scope status, and to do that, first actually I'm going to change my view that allows me to secure the different attributes. Let's look at my object again. Scope status, as you can see, this one has been secured. I have it set it up such that only the project manager can change the scope status, and the team member can view it but cannot modify it. To see that in action, let's go into a specific project where I, as a project manager, should be able to edit it. So I belong to the project manager group. I can go into my status report, and here the scope status, the first thing you will notice is that the scope status has the field level security icon displayed next to it, which means that's a clear indicator that this specific field is being secured using field level security. Because I belong to the project manager group, I can make changes to this. I can change this back to on track, or change it to require needs help if I want to. Let's go ahead and log in as a team member, and we can easily see that the team member can only view it but not edit it. So I've now logged in as a team member, which is Sean Evans. So Sean Evans is a team member for my project. I'm going to go ahead and go to that same project just to keep it consistent, which is the incident response playbook. I'm going to go into status, and you can see that by double clicking I cannot edit it because I, as a team member, can only view this data. The same is also supported in the grid layout. So right here in the grid layout, if I try to edit the scope status, I cannot do that because the team member can only view it but not make any changes to it. All right. I'm going to log back out as Sean Evans and go back in as myself, so I can continue to show the next part of the demo, which is in the blueprint, the passing of additional parameters to my channels. To do that, first let's go look at the blueprint itself, and I have configured a blueprint which is a personal page, and in this personal page I have configured two new channels. The first one is the My Allocation, and I'm using the context sensitive relative URL, and in that relative URL I am showing the user's allocation in the classic UI. Just for this example, I'm going to take the user to the classic UI, and when doing so I'm going to pass my resource ID of the logged in user and the user ID of the logged in user. I can pass that information now as a parameter to my channel. The second channel that I have is the My Access group. So this is where I am taking the user directly to the classic UI to be able to see the user groups that that specific user belongs to. And in this case, again, I'm passing my user ID and I'm passing the resource ID as the two parameters to show the user. If I had a portlet page with that which required me passing the resource or user ID, then I could have used that as an example. But in this case, this is more to just show that this parameter will pass the values and will work correctly. So let's see it in action. So let's go to our pages. Let's go to the personal pages. And when I go to my allocation, it should show me only my specific allocation. And there it is. I'm only seeing my specific allocation because I passed my resource ID only. Similarly, if I go to my access group, I should be only able to see the access groups that I belong to. So these are all the access groups that I belong to. All right, next, let's look at the enhancement to the investment allocation job. So for that, I'm going to go back to the classic UI administration. I'm going to go into the jobs and reports. Actually, I'm going to go to the classic UI and I'm just going to go to the jobs and report there directly. And I am going to look for the investment allocation job with the new name, which is the update investment allocation and usage. Clicking inside of it, you can now see that I have the additional parameter that are being passed to it. I can either select the investments, I can pick any one of the investments, I can pick the OBS unit and the OBS unit filter or the investment manager, and I can then submit this job. So now this job will accept multiple or these 4 parameters. Next, let's look at the changes that are being done to the license calculation, and to see that I'm going to go into my studio administration, the classic UI administration. I'm going to go into the actually first let's look at the object itself to show that I have an object that is called objectives and key results. This is a sub-object to the strategy as the master object, right? If I now go look at the license information and I filter for the same sub-object, there you go. So now you can see the objectives and key results. The create, delete, and edit are all being tracked as restricted license type rather than full. The view is going to continue to be tracked as view license type. All right. Next, let's look at how the dynamic lookup can be used in the board column layout. To see that, first I'm going to go in to my object definition. So I'm going to see within my investment that I have an attribute that uses dynamic lookup. So within investment, I have an attribute called strategic sponsor. This is a lookup. It's a dynamic lookup that is pulling information from the strategy and business objective. If I now go into my modern UX and I go into my project grid, if I go to the board view, I can change my board view layout. So right now this is showing me information based on the status of my investment. I can change that the board view column, that instead of work status, show me the data based on the sponsor. The strategic sponsor is now available to me, and I can easily see the columns based on the different strategic sponsor that have been allocated towards my investment itself. The same thing is also available in roadmap. Now again, like I mentioned, the details of that will be in the roadmap training, but I'm just going to show an example where if I go into my roadmap and if I go into my timeline view, I can easily filter. So right now it is showing me the swim lanes based on a static value or static lookup. I can easily do the same to show me the swim lanes based on sponsor. And now it'll show me my swim lanes based on the sponsors for my investment. So we support dynamic lookups in the board view as well as in the roadmap swim lanes. All right, next let's go back to my modern UX where I can configure the attribute tooltips. Right, so right now before I do the configuration, let me show you that in my projects I have the strategy as an attribute, and the strategy attribute does not have any tooltip. It is a required field, but it doesn't have any tooltip. So if I want to make it easier for my end users to know why this is a required field, I can do so by configuring tooltips in the modern UX. And the way I would configure that is I would go into the administration in modern UX. I'm going to go into attributes. I'm going to look for the object which is project, and I'm going to look for the attribute specifically in this case, which is strategy. To configure tooltips, there is a new attribute added to the attribute section, and I have a saved view to show you that specific. Alright, so I'm in my attributes itself, and there is a new column which is called tooltip. Tooltip is where I can populate a value, and once I populate a value, then the tooltip will be displayed to my end user against that specific attribute. So let's go ahead and again filter for my strategy attribute. For this attribute, I can populate a value that will tell my end user why the strategy is required. And I have a pre-configured message. I can easily just take that and populate that information that each investment requires a strategy populated to ensure its alignment to the corporate objectives. Anytime now the user comes in, they should be able to see this message. All right, so let's look at that message. So now I'm going to go back to projects. And once in the projects, again, if you look at the strategy column, now there is a new tooltip icon next to it, and hovering over it displays the message that I've just populated, that each investment requires strategy populated to ensure alignment with the corporate objectives. So that message is now displayed in the grid view. If I go into details, let's select one, and for the same strategy I can see the same message or the same tooltip being displayed, and if I open my investment I should be able to see the same inside the properties for the same attribute. Just hovering over that will display that message to the end user. The same can also be translated into another language, which is the tooltip can be translated to another language, and the way that is done is similar to how labels are translated. To do that, I'm going to log out as the administrator that has this specific locale, and I'm going to log in with the another administrator that has the locale, or sorry, the language of Spanish. So I'm going to log out as myself. I'm going to log in as another user that has the language set to Spanish. I'm going to go into the administration, going to go into attributes, and for the attribute labeling, I'm in the project object, and I'm going to search for the attribute again, which is strategy. And for the strategy, I'm going to populate my tooltip in the Spanish language. Now that that is done, I can go into projects, and now coming in here, I can see that the strategy tooltip will be displayed in Spanish. Right here, there is my strategy column, and then hovering over it, the tooltip is being displayed to me in Spanish, and I can see the same in the details. Selecting a specific one, the tooltip will be then displayed across the same way in the Spanish language. All right. Next, I'm going to log back out and log in as myself again and show you the next part of the demo, which is the ability where I can see the attribute grouped correctly or in a standard way in the hierarchies. So for that, I'm going to go into hierarchies, and I am going to go into my FY22 planning hierarchy. And right here within my hierarchy, I can see that for my hierarchy tree view, the colors area, I can see that the attributes are organized within their object type. So there is the custom investment, there is the business objectives. If I type in, I can easily see the attributes that are specific to custom common investment and attributes that are specific to business outcome. The same is available to me if I go into the manage metrics, and if I try to create a new metrics, just defining it right here, I can see the attributes listed under their respective object types. And there is the total values that are available to me to view. All right. Next, we want to see how the channels will support SSO. To do that, I'm going to go into my Modern UX Administration. I'm going to go into the blueprints, and I have a blueprint defined in the pages for my Agile dashboard. Going inside of it, when I look at my modules, I have different modules predefined, and the first one of those is the Rally Team Board using SSO authentication. Right? You can see it has populated the channel URL to go into my team plan, and you can also see I have populated the single sign-on URL. This is the URL that should be taken, the user should be taken to perform the IDP initiated login, and this is the URL to be used for Rally in this example for ensuring or checking if the user is already logged in or not. If the user is logged in, and I should get a 200 response code, and if so, I can then essentially continue with my SSO. To see this in working, let's publish this. To see this in working, I am going to use my browser in incognito mode to ensure that there is no other pre-login message. And I will log into Clarity again because I'm using a new incognito window. Let's go into my pages, and let's go into the Agile dashboard. And now, as the end user, I'm going to click on the channel that has the Rally configured with SSO. Clicking on it, you can see I get the message. The first thing, as I mentioned, that the name of the message that is being displayed, the name of the module that I clicked on is part of the message, and it's telling me that the authentication is in progress. I have also enabled pop-up, so you can see that a pop-up came up where I can continue with my IDP login. So let me go ahead and continue with that. In our case, we also have a two-factor authentication using either biometrics or a text message. So I'm going to continue with that. Once the login is successful, the pop-up will then close, and you can see that the channel will automatically display the third-party application because of the successful login using the SSO flow. So now Rally is displayed as a channel inside of Clarity using the SSO flow. All right, I'm going to go log out of this one and go back to my original non-incognito mode. Next, the last part of the demo that we wanted to see was the business rules for sub-objects. And to do that, I'm going to go back into my modern UX administration. I'm going to go into the blueprints for my project. And within the project, I have a sub-object, which is the status report. And that's an out-of-the-box sub-object, status report. I can go into the rules, and I have created two rules for my sub-object. The first one is where I want that the strategic sponsor should only be populated by a certain by the PM. So let's go into the first rule that I pre-created, which is the status report cost and effort. Going in here, you would notice the very first thing, which is the target object. So in this case, I have the target object status report. I have my condition predefined, which is that if the report status is draft, then anybody or only the project manager should be able to edit the cost and effort field. For everybody else, this should be disabled. The second is I have locked the entire status report once the status report, the report status is changed to final. And just to show you one of the existing ones, which is I also in the same, I have business rules defined against the parent object, which is the project itself. Notice that the target object is non-editable. So once this value is populated, it's an enter once field. You cannot modify that. If you want, you can either delete it or create a new rule. You can define the rule name, and then you can select, do you want this rule to run against the parent object or to run against the sub object? And then accordingly define the conditions. If I select the sub object, I can define the conditions, but my actions, only two actions are possible: disabling editing of attribute or disabling editing of the entire record. We will support out-of-the-box sub-object as well as custom sub-objects. So to see that custom sub-object, let's go back out of here. Let's go into my idea blueprint. And here I have created a rule where the strategic alliance can only be edited by executives. For everybody else, it is disabled for editing. All right. This concludes this section. Thank you, everyone.